gorgeous ones, and welcome to my masterclass on understanding the cycle of emotional eating. In this masterclass today, we're actually going to be looking at what emotional eating is, how to tell if you are an emotional eater, and the cycle of emotional eating that we get pulled into, and how you can create strategies and habits that are going to help you to overcome and heal your own emotional eating. So, welcome to this free masterclass. I am Emma Jane from Emma Jane Empowerment. I am an empowerment coach and an Akashic guide, and I specialize in working with women to heal their relationship with their bodies and with food. And I know exactly where you are coming from because I struggled with my body image, emotional eating, and an eating disorder for over 25 years. So I have the first hand experience to know exactly where you are coming from and how all of this feels for you. So, welcome. What you will need today is some paper and a pen or some way of taking some notes. At the end of this masterclass, we are going to go through a combination of a meditation and an Akashic record session so that you can delve a little more deeply into some of the questions that I have for you. But for now, let's get started. So, what is emotional eating? At its core, it is a coping mechanism that we use to avoid our feelings, because for many of us, we have these deep feelings, these deep emotions that can be really difficult to face and to address. And it's often a lot easier to just turn to food or drugs or alcohol or some other numbing action rather than actually dive in and get to the source of what we are feeling and how it's affecting us. It is a nice, easy solution. We don't have to face it. We don't have to address it. We don't have to dig up any more pain. We can just stuff everything down either with food or some other action, and it just makes life a little bit easier. The problem with that, though, is that when we are stuffing down our emotions, when we are using food to avoid what we're feeling, we take away our power in the sense that we don't give ourselves then the opportunity to feel what we're feeling for obvious reasons, but also we don't get the chance then to learn new strategies or create new habits that would actually be far more supportive. Now, I know sometimes it can be really scary to have to face those feelings and emotions, and firsthand, I know what it's like to just eat to block everything out, but it's also that action of, we don't want to have to bring up what's there. We don't want to have to face it. And a lot of that is because there is that feeling of fear, the feeling of unhappiness, the feeling of unworthiness. In my experience personally, and from being a personal trainer in the past and working with other women, it often stems, these feelings and emotions and this need to cope with food, it often stems out of fear of having to face our truth or face something that we just don't want to face. It stems from feeling unhappy in our life, not knowing how to fix, if you like, or heal what's going on so that you can actually start to feel joy and happiness. And it comes from that feeling of being unworthy, of not deserving what it is you want, of having to live up to expectations and feeling that there's no way that you can actually do that. So as a coping mechanism, being able to just eat and block it all out and numb it, it just makes it easier for us. But it of course raises so many other issues, and it really is just a symptom. It's often treated like the cause. One of the biggest issues I used to have when I was studying body image and eating disorders was that it's often just treated as a physical condition or a physical situation. People just want to address the action of the eating, and it's not the eating itself that is the problem. It is just a symptom. The eating is what you do in order to deal. It is not your that's not the problem. That is not what's going on. It's not the issue, it's just a symptom. The real issue, the real cause is what you are feeling, and that fear of not being able to express what you're feeling. It's the fear of not being worthy of or deserving. It's the fear of not being able to love or be loved. It's of not being good enough. It's the underlying beliefs and thoughts that is what we need to treat when we're working with emotional eating, and not the food itself. Because once we can heal, once we can open up to all those underlying beliefs, once we can start to change them, the eating takes care of itself. And I know that if you're stuck in the cycle, it can be a little hard to hear that, and it probably makes no sense. Like, how is the eating just going to take care of itself if I deal with all this? But it does. We eat because we get triggered, and I will get to this in a moment when we talk about the cycle of emotional eating. But when we're no longer triggered, or when we are able to deal with those triggers in a healthier way, if we have strategies and habits in place, if we know why we're being triggered and we know what we're feeling, we're not afraid to face it, then we're better equipped to deal with and handle that urge to eat. And we're better able to really take stock and decide if we want to eat, how not to eat, what we can do in place. So the eating will take care of itself. Too often we just focus on that. A lot of techniques out there suggest, replacing the unhealthy food with healthier food. That just gives you something else to binge on, to stuff your emotions down with. It really doesn't matter if you're eating a bag of chips or a bag of carrots. If you're not dealing with your emotions, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the food is that you're eating. It doesn't matter what kind of alcohol you drink. It doesn't matter what else you're taking to numb. If you're not dealing with those emotions and those feelings, then the actions are just going to continue as they have. It doesn't matter what you replace them with. So you have to get to the core of that first. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, how you can actually begin to get to the core of that, begin to explore those feelings and emotions. And I will be taking you through that with some questions later on in the meditation as well. So, now that we know what it is, how can you tell if you are an emotional eater? Well, the good thing, if there is a good thing, is that being an emotional eater has some very common signs for everyone. Like many conditions and many situations, there are going to be some commonalities that you can tick off, if you like. Now, some of these may apply to you. Maybe it's just one or two. Maybe it's all of them. But what is important here is being able to see that you are using food as that coping mechanism and the ways in which it's coming through. So I have a few questions for you. Now, if you want to jot these down, you can pause the video later on and do so when you watch it back. But for now, try and be as honest as possible as you answer these, because as you answer them, they are going to help you to see where you are using food. Because even if we are all emotional eaters, my way of using food is going to be different to your way of using food. We may both exhibit the same signs in regards to being emotional eaters, but how we use the food and when we use the food is going to be different. So here is how you can tell if you are an emotional eater. The first is that you tend to eat more when you're feeling stressed or anxious or emotional. Okay, when we are feeling that stress and anxiety, it is much easier to just kind of grab the food, regardless of what it is, so that we can block it, so that we don't have to feel that, so that we can numb it. So the number one sign that you are an emotional eater is that you are going to eat a lot more when you are feeling stressed or anxious. The next is that you continue to eat even if you are completely full or even when you're not hungry. Now, obviously, there are going to be times such as if we've gone out to dinner or if we're sort of not feeling well and it's mealtime, that we're going to eat just because it's lunchtime and you have to eat and you might not feel like it but you kind of have to anyway, or you've gone out for a meal and it's been really nice and yes, you're kind of completely full, but oh geez, that dessert tray looks nice, doesn't it? Now that's not what I'm talking about here in determining if you're an emotional eater. What this question is about is, do you continue to eat when you are full or not hungry under other circumstances? So not because it's mealtime and you have to because you're on a lunch break at work, or because you're not sure when you're going to eat if you don't. It's not about going out for a meal and that kind of things. It's that all those other times when you will sit there and continue to eat even though you really just can't. Okay, even when you're not hungry, it's just because you need to do something. You need to do something with your mouth, you need to do something with your hands. It's just because you're bored, it's because you're stressed, it's because you just don't want to have to deal, it's because the kids have frustrated you, it's because you've had an argument with your partner. If at any other point you turn to food and just continue to eat it, that is a sign that you're an emotional eater. Do you eat also to feel better or to calm yourself or to soothe yourself? And this is a really big one when it comes to knowing if you're an emotional eater, because food can be incredibly soothing and calming. If you are feeling angry, if you are feeling frustrated, if you just want to scream and throw things, if you feel like you can't, food can have a very calming effect. And if you find yourself that you are doing this regularly, then your emotions really are controlling your food intake and how you are coping with what's going on around you. Now, this next question is a really, really big one, because food is so integral to society. It's so integral to all of our celebrations and how we get together with friends and family. And this is, do you reward yourself with food? And I think particularly as women, we do this a lot. We will celebrate our achievements by buying a cake, or if you've had I used to see this a lot in the gym, where people would have, a really good week in the gym and they've, hit all their targets, or they've been to the gym 3 or 4 times and they've done this and they've done that. So they will go and reward themselves for their workouts with, a nice cream cake or some cheesecake or a nice block of chocolate, or, a new bottle of wine. It's so easy to use food and alcohol and other substances to reward ourselves and to celebrate, because when we celebrate, what do? For birthdays, we're having cake and lots of food. When we celebrate a special occasion, we will go out for dinner. If you have a big business deal, you go out for dinner. So much of how we celebrate within society is based around food, and that makes this one really tough. But it's kind of like the other question in regards to overeating, that are you using food at other times as a reward? If you've had, a good day with clients, are you then sitting down and rewarding yourself with a nice cheese platter, or, getting yourself some takeaway because you've done this and you deserve a night off from cooking, and all of that kind of thing? So are you using food to reward yourself when you could be doing other things to actually celebrate your successes? Now, this next question, to see if you're an emotional eater, is kind of tied in with that second one, and it's about, do you overeat regardless of what you have already eaten? So if you've already had, maybe you've already sat down and had your evening meal, but there's still that urge to eat, and so you've had your evening meal and then you've had some dessert, and then still not quite satisfied even though you've had plenty to eat. So then there's that, well, I might just go have that block of chocolate. I'm still not feeling it, so I might just go grab that bag of chips or that packet of biscuits or that whatever it is that's in the cupboard or the fridge or the freezer. And this again is just that sign that you are avoiding something, or that you're not expressing something, or that it's just easier to keep going because you are feeling emotionally unsatisfied. You are not feeling full from that emotional or energetic perspective. So physically, yes, you absolutely are, and you probably can't fit much more in, but there's still that desire, that need to eat because you don't feel full. Now, these next couple are really, really interesting, and for some of you, they might be a little bit triggering, but you are an emotional eater if you feel that food makes you feel safe. Now, that can be a little bit of a tricky one, but for some of us, there's safety in food, there's safety in eating. It's, this comforting blanket, if you like. It means that we don't have to address what we're feeling. It means that we can just ignore it and, put our head in the sand. And so it's this nice comforting blanket that we can just kind of wrap ourselves in to feel a little bit better. So, and it, as I said, it's so comforting. So it makes us feel safe. So does eating make you feel safe? Also, do you feel like food is a friend who gets you? When it comes to our healing and moving forward and being able to get to the cause of things, we don't always have those support systems in place. We don't always have people that we can turn to who can assist us, who can help us, who can give us the advice we need. Sometimes the people around us just aren't able to understand where we're coming from. And so it's very easy then to turn to food as your friend, because although you can't talk to it, it helps you ignore those feelings and emotions. It helps you to avoid what you're feeling. It's a nice little kind of wing woman, if you like, because then you just don't have to address things. You can just go off and have a little party by yourself with your nice table spread out of food and stuff yourself silly, and you don't have to worry about things. So you've got your friend, you've got your block of chocolate, you've got your bottle of wine, you've got your tub of ice cream. It's all nice and simple. And then our final question to tell if you are an emotional eater is, do you feel powerless and out of control when it comes to food and eating? And this is a really big one, because one of the big, I don't want to say issues, but one of the really big things when it comes to emotional eating is that we are giving away our power. It's, how can I best put this? I have a tarot deck called the Steampunk Tarot, and in it, it's the Devil card is probably one of the best representations I've ever seen. It has this big metal monster. It's got the master and the apprentice, and the master's got these wires that he's trying to hold and control this big monster, and the apprentice is shoveling coal into the belly of the monster to keep feeding it. Power and control is kind of like that. So in this particular depiction of the Devil card, it's basically showing that this thing started off as this really cool creation. They made this, nice metal thing, and it's fed and controlled by the fire. But then it gets too big and it starts to take on a life of its own. And so all of a sudden it's gone from something that's being controlled by the master with the wires and fire to it's controlling the master and the apprentice. They have to keep stoking the fire. They have to keep doing this to try and control this big metal monster. And any type of addiction is very much like this, where we start off where we're in control. You didn't start off this cycle of emotional eating with it controlling you. It started off where you might have just been using food as a reward when you had a good day, or when you're feeling a little bit sad, you went and grabbed a tub of ice cream or a block of chocolate. You were in control initially. You had the power to stop if you wanted to. Probably even in the beginning you weren't overeating that much, or you weren't really using food to cope all that often. But over time, it starts to take over, it starts to control you, and you lose that sense of power. You then come to this situation where when you are feeling emotional, when you've had a bad day, when you've had a good day, when the kids have annoyed the crap out of you, when you've had another argument with your partner, when you've tried to go to the supermarket and once again, because lockdown or this or that, and you can't get what you want. And so there's that lack of power, that lack of feeling like you have any control over anything. And so there's that powerlessness around food. And this is one that's really important because this sense of power comes into play so much with our emotions and our feelings towards ourselves. So this, even though it's like the last question, it's also kind of like the number one question for me is, do you feel powerless when it comes to food? Because if you are feeling powerless, you are going to find yourself stuck in that cycle so much more often because you have, or you feel like you have no power to stop or to take control or to try and heal. Now, for some of you, you might have said a big yes to all of those statements around being an emotional eater, and for some of you, it might have only been one or two. Either way, what we're really looking at there is to be able to identify that yes, you are using food as a coping mechanism. Yes, you are using food as a way of dealing and getting through and avoiding what you are feeling. And as I said at the start, that is just a symptom. Your emotional eating is not the cause. It is simply a symptom of something far deeper that is going on. So now that we know that you are an emotional eater, let's take a look at the 4 steps in the cycle of emotional eating. And once we know these steps, one of the powerful things about knowing these steps is that you can then use them to take back some control, to take back your power. If you understand particularly the step that you are having the most trouble with, the one that's really causing you the most difficulty and pain, that's where you'll know where you need to focus on in this healing and understanding of your own emotional eating. So I'm just going to pause for a second because I'm starting to feel a little bit dry. Okay, so the 4 steps, and when you hear them, they're going to make so much sense. And also it's kind of one of those things of like, how did I not recognize that? But there are only 4, and they are, the first step is that you are triggered in some way, shape or form. The second is once you are triggered, you have this overwhelming urge to need to eat. The third is that you then engage in the process of overeating. And then finally, there's that sense of guilt and shame around your eating. And then our 4th step in the cycle of emotional eating is feeling guilt and shame over what we have done. So I want to take some time now to really go through each of these 4 steps and look at them a little bit more in depthly. You may want to grab your notebook so you can write down some questions that I'm going to throw at you through this, because in your own time you can then go through and answer these questions and really explore each of these 4 steps a little bit more deeply. So the first step is, as I said, that we are triggered, and these triggers normally are emotional, are often linked to stress and anxiety, but they can also be emotions and feelings of sadness, of frustration, of anger, and they can also be linked to people or situations. And sometimes, and this might sound a little bit crazy, but sometimes the trigger itself can be a food. When I was younger, I went through, probably like most of us have done at some point, that real low-fat diet stage. And it got to the point where, because I would so often use low fat food whenever I was on a diet, whenever I was in my own cycle of my eating disorder, that low fat food became, linked to dieting, to needing to lose weight, to, feeling badly about myself. That I then reached a point where, for me, having low fat food in the house is a trigger. To consume low fat food on a regular basis becomes a trigger. I can no longer have that, because after a while I will be triggered into believing those stories that I associated with low fat foods in the past, and it will trigger my emotional eating. I then just want to go out and eat everything that I can. So it's something that I no longer have. For you, it could be something completely different, if it is a food or a particular other substance that you might not be able to have around, because it will trigger you. It will trigger your anxiety. It will trigger your stress. It will trigger depression. It will trigger anger. It can also be people and situations. We have certain people sometimes in our lives that, although we may love them and we don't necessarily want to be rid of them, they become triggers for us, and they raise emotions and feelings that we just don't feel that we can deal with, we don't feel that we are equipped to have to deal with. And so it then becomes a situation where every time we're near that person, anytime we're in their energy, even just thinking about them will trigger us to feel a particular way and trigger our need to eat. Same with certain situations. You might find certain situations really raise your stress and your anxiety, and the only way to cope with that is to eat. So I do have a few questions for you, so grab your notebooks. Okay, so one of the things, or a couple of the things that I would like you to ask yourself around your triggers, because knowing your triggers is really going to help you to know where you are in the cycle of emotional eating. But knowing your triggers also means that you can start to plan and have strategies and have other coping mechanisms in place. So if you know, for instance, that you have to go spend the day with your family, and that, your mother is going to make God knows how many comments about how you look, from, the way your hair is, to you not wearing enough makeup, or wearing too much makeup, or she doesn't like the dress, or blah, 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 blah. If you know that that's going to be a trigger, then you can have some strategies in place, so that you are not going to get home and then raid the entire fridge because, oh my God, you're so stressed and you're so anxious and you're so frustrated and, oh, I want to kill it, right? So knowing what triggers you, knowing how it's going to trigger you in terms of what emotions it's going to bring up, is going to help you to really take that first step into creating those new strategies and habits, but also to be able to start to heal your own emotional eating. So here's a couple of questions for you. The first is, when are you most triggered? We all have situations or experiences that are going to trigger us. So like I said, it might be a particular person or a family member. It might be being around a particular food. It might be having to face a particular situation. Some of us don't like public speaking, so it might be that you have to give up and give a presentation. That is really going to set off your stress and anxiety. That's going to trigger you. So when are you most triggered? What are the situations that trigger you the most? And also, what are the situations that really raise your stress and anxiety? So these two are kind of tied in together, but what is it that really raises that stress, raises that anxiety, really makes you feel that urge to eat because you can't cope with what's going on? And then what are the people that do that as well? So these are all really tied together. I guess really they're the one question. But I'm going to separate it into situations and people, as well as what else is it that really triggers you the most, and when are you triggered. Also, it might be interesting to note when we're looking at when you're triggered, at what time of the day or what time of the week. Because for some of us, we might be triggered earlier in the day when we have things planned out and it suddenly doesn't go to plan. If something interrupts our plan, that might be a trigger. It might be that we get to the end of the day. You might have a really good day at work, or doing something else, and then you get home and suddenly you're bombarded by the family, and it's this needs to be done and that needs to be done, and you have to pay for this, you've got to sign this has to be done because I need this for school tomorrow, blah blah blah. And then suddenly this, you've had this really awesome day, but then there's this massive list of everybody expecting all of this stuff the second you've walked through the door, and that could be a trigger. It could also be that maybe it's when you get to the end of the week, if you've had a lot of early mornings, or if you've had a lot of work that you had to do that you've struggled to get done. It might be that you get to the end of the week and that's a trigger because of everything that's being carried over, and so you get to the weekend and you just want to numb, you just want to avoid it, you just want to sit and numb out to all the food so that you do not have to think of everything that you've done this week, or even start to think of everything that you need to do next week. So have a look at the times as well when you're asking these questions of, when during the day or during the week are you feeling the most triggered as well. Now the next part of the emotional eating cycle is the urge to eat. And most of the time this is probably the hardest one, because it is that urge. It is, as I mentioned before, with the devil card in the steampunk tarot, it's that monster that has control over you. So what makes this one particularly difficult is that you are fighting this insatiable monster or demon in your head that it just wants to get you to eat no matter what. And what I've found in my experience is that it can either come up and build really, really slowly. So for some of you, you might get triggered and you might start to feel something, but over the course of an hour, 2 hours, the rest of the day, that urge to eat swells. As the emotion grows within you, then the urge to eat starts to grow as well. Or it could be sudden. It could be like a wave crashing down. You could feel that anger, that frustration, that sadness, that stress, and the second later it's, I need to eat something. So being able to identify that is a really important one as well. And you might find it changes depending on the situation. You might have some situations where it really is that slow building over the course of the day. Others, it might just be instantaneous, depending on what's going on around you. But either way, you have this, once you are triggered, you have this overwhelming urge to eat, regardless of how it builds. And this is where we really start to give away our power, where we really start to lose that sense of control, where we are at the mercy of our emotions, where we're at the mercy of this urge to eat. And what we eat is really important here too, because the foods that we are drawn to are linked to our emotions. So what we're feeling, now most of you probably already know this, if you have been an emotional eater for a while, then you would have already probably realized that when you're feeling sad or depressed, you're drawn to things like ice cream or yogurt, something soft and creamy. When you're angry, then it's things like potato chips, which are nice and hard and crunchy, so it's that nice satisfying crunch that you can bite down onto. There are certain foods, our carb-based foods bring us comfort because of how they raise our endorphins. How you're feeling, whatever the situation is, it's often linked to the types of foods that we choose. So this can be a really important thing to really identify and understand in your cycle of emotional eating, is what foods are you drawn to? Because knowing that, you'll be able to understand which emotions you feel the most, And then that will help later on when we're creating strategies and habits, because if you know that primarily you are triggered by anger and frustration, and so therefore you have a tendency to grab those hard, crunchy, salty, savory foods that you can really just get into, then when you create your strategies and your habits, you can then focus on, okay, well, I'm normally triggered by frustration. So when I'm feeling frustrated, how could I release that frustration? How can I release that anger? What can I do in that moment so that I'm not feeling that particular emotion? And same with sadness, with anxiety, with stress as well. Now, what I do want to discuss here briefly too is the link to our chakras, because our main 7 chakras are actually linked to certain types of foods, or certain styles of emotional eating. So I'm just going to go through them briefly because these are really fascinating. When I looked at them, like so much clicked and it made so much sense. So we'll go through them from the root up to the crown, and I think you'll find these ones just as fascinating as I did, because that energetic link between it all makes so much sense. So with our root chakra, we are often drawn to addictions and overeating, and we do this when we feel that we are not worthy, when we're not sure what we deserve, or it's linked really to what we feel we deserve in and out of life. And so often this will come, our feelings of what we deserve will actually come from our family or come from our environment, because our root chakra is linked with that sort of family and that connection to our tribe, that a community, it's where we belong. And so if the message that we've received is that we aren't deserving, or we're only deserving if and when something else takes place, that really then links in energetically to this need to overeat, in terms of trying to release that fear that we don't deserve anything else. We're trying to feed that need to own our place in the world, to exist, to be heard, to be seen. And sometimes it's just easier to squash that down. But this then is also linked to other addictions. So things like gambling, alcohol, drugs, even sex addictions. This all takes place from that sense of what we do and don't deserve in life. So just the act itself of overeating being linked to our root chakra, if we can then dive into what we think we deserve, or our beliefs around what we deserve, and whether or not that's true, that can go a really long way in helping us to heal this part of ourselves, this need to overeat, or to have this addiction where we're being controlled by something, or where we think we're controlling it, which is often the key. We often start off thinking we're in control, and even when we're in the midst of being controlled by it, we tell ourselves we can control it when we really can't. Now, our sacral chakra tends to manifest in a desire for gluten-based foods, and this it's really tied into those the need for those endorphins, that need for comfort, because with the sacral, it's linked to our feelings towards ourselves. Now, you'll see a connection in all of this in terms of worth and what we feel we deserve. It's our beliefs around our worth are so entwined in our emotional eating, and entwined in our emotions, in our feelings, our thoughts, and our beliefs. And so our feelings towards ourselves, and whether or not we think we're good enough, whether or not we think we're worthy enough, this is going to manifest when we don't have that sense of self-esteem, of self-worth, of being deserving. It's going to manifest in that depression, that anxiety, that feeling that you are somehow not good enough. And this will then manifest itself in that need for gluten-based food. So when you are drawn, for instance, to a big plate of lasagna or pasta or rice or bread, that's that need for comfort. It's that need to sort of be wrapped up in that food so that you can feel that you are worthy, so that you can feel that you are loved. It's that sort of that false sense of comfort that comes from eating those gluten-based foods. Now, with the solar plexus, it's a little bit different. So, with the solar plexus, it's related to those feelings of self esteem and how you regard yourself. It's also related to feeling smothered or under nurtured. And when you have those feelings that where you feel that either you were, you know, not nurtured enough and not loved enough, not cared for enough, or when you feel that, you were kind of bombarded, it's like, oh my God, let me breathe, that will manifest in addictions to caffeine and sugar. So the caffeine is kind of that need to, release the smothering, like, oh my God, get off me, give me the energy to get away from this. Whereas the sugar is that feeding of ourselves, that nurturing, it's that piling in of something sweet because we didn't get the sweetness. So the smothering and the caffeine is kind of like the bitterness to push it away, and the undernurturing and the sugar is more of the attracting the sweetness back in, if that makes sense. I know, kind of a little bit confusing, but at the same time it does make sense. In one that you're when you're feeling smothered, you want to push it away, like, oh my God, give me space to breathe, and coffee is so bitter, so it's that bitterness, that anger of just get away. Whereas when it's, you don't feel like you've had that love and that nurturing, it's like, I want something sweet, give me the sweetness, like show me that I'm deserving of this sweetness. And so you're trying to attract something sweet, something comforting back into your life. Now, a really interesting one is the heart chakra. Now, as we know, the heart chakra is linked to love and affection and our relationships. And this is not just our relationship with other people, but it's also, most importantly, our relationship to ourselves, and whether or not we feel worthy, whether or not we feel loved, whether or not we feel that it's safe to love, whether or not we believe that we are lovable. And this will manifest in addictions to, or the need to consume, chocolate and alcohol. So again, it's a little bit of that sweetness. It's also a bit of tartness, but it will manifest. So if you have this addiction to chocolate and that you call on chocolate primarily in your emotional eating, or you're using alcohol in order to cope, really take a look at your heart chakra and your beliefs around love, and whether or not you are worthy of love, whether or not you can be loved, whether or not it's safe to be loved. Because that's going to have such a big influence too on your worth and what you feel that you deserve. Our belief around whether or not we're worthy of love, that we're lovable, that anyone would want to love us, is a huge part of understanding our own worth and what drives us forward as well. Now, this next one with the throat chakra is really, really fascinating from an energetic point of view. Now, as we know, our throat chakra is linked to our voice, it's linked to our communication, to our ability to speak our truth or to speak up, to be heard. When I was younger, I used to be so scared of having to give presentations and of standing up in front of the class that you could guarantee that when it was my turn to have to give a presentation, I would get laryngitis. I would lose my voice. I would be so croaky. Like, I literally couldn't speak. That's how terrifying it was for me to have. Like, there was a time years ago, there's no way I could teach you a masterclass because I just would not have been able to speak to the camera. I wouldn't have been able to share it. So we know this about our throat chakra. But what's really fascinating with our throat chakra is that when we feel that we can't speak, when we feel that we can't share our voice, it's not even about speaking the truth. If you feel that you cannot speak at all, that it's not okay to be heard in any way, this then manifests in this desire to have to eat, to have to do something with our mouth, to sort of not just even stuff it down, but to sort of crush the desire to let those words come out. So I found this one really, really fascinating when I was doing my research into the chakras and emotional eating, because it is what we're doing when we turn to emotional eating. We aren't speaking what we're feeling. We aren't sharing our emotions. And it's not about sharing it with somebody else. It's even just sharing it with ourselves. When we are able to speak what's being felt, when we can't express that, then we do. That's what that desire to eat is. It's about squashing it down. That's how the emotional eating works. We're trying to numb everything down. We're trying to push it down so that it can't rise up, so it can't break free. So that was a really, really fascinating connection energetically that I found, and hopefully you'll find it just as fascinating, because it makes so much sense. If we are not expressing ourselves, then we need to do something with that energy around the emotion and the feelings. And of course it means that we're going to stuff it down, and that we're not going to express it, and when we're going to find a way to use food to do that, because food is our number one coping strategy. Now, moving on from that, with the third eye, this one, obviously, because of perception is like the biggest thing when it comes to body image and eating disorders and disordered eating. But having the third eye with its perception and how we see ourselves, it is linked to those issues regarding disordered eating, eating disorders, and body image. And so much of our emotional eating is linked to how we feel about our body, because our worth is often determined by how we see ourselves. Now, obviously, that's not always the case, but certainly as women, we are taught that unless we look a certain way, then we're not worthy, then we're not going to be loved, then we're not going to attract the right kind of partner. And obviously, it's not just for women. Certainly, men have it too. There is that expectation that men are supposed to be the heroes and the rescuers, and they've got to come and save these precious little damsels in distress, and they have to look like, Thor or, some other superhero. They have to have this perfect, strong, masculine body. Now, that obviously puts a lot of pressure on men as well. So this is not just a female thing. But how we see ourselves is going to have a huge influence on our worth and what we think we deserve. Because if we honestly believe that the way we look isn't what it's supposed to be, then that's going to influence our actions and our behaviors towards our bodies and towards food. And we're either going to restrict what we eat, or we're going to have that eating disorder or that disordered eating pattern where we are not really nurturing ourselves, where we're not taking good care of ourselves. We're going to have that distorted view of how we actually look, because our mental image is going to be so messed up. So being able to have a more realistic view of our bodies and who we are can really help us to begin to heal that and overcome what it is that we're facing within the third eye and within our own body image and disordered eating. And then finally, we're going to get to the crown. Now, with the crown, this is linked largely to depression and our own mental health. And the link here in terms of emotional eating comes to do with identity. Because when we lose our identity, we kind of lose who we are, and it's really hard then to know what we deserve, to understand our worth, to have that really healthy perception of ourselves, to have those healthy thoughts and behaviors and beliefs and emotions, if we feel like we don't exist, if we feel like we don't belong, if we feel that we have no purpose. Or if we feel that our purpose is simply to live up to the expectations of others, something that's really going to trigger that anxiety or low level depression is that idea that you are here only because of what other people can get from you. And this will often be linked to stories we're told right back down at our root chakra from family and our environment that, you only deserve this in life if you do this. So I will love you, but only if. Or, yes, you can have these things, but only if. And so when we think that our purpose is simply to do what other people want and live up to their expectations, that's going to lead to those low levels of depression. It's going to lead to that sadness. It's going to lead to that stress and anxiety. That's going to then have us turn to food in order to try and cope with that. Now, these questions for your urge to eat may actually trigger you. I hope they won't. But for this work, I want you to really take some time now with all of these questions. Take your time to answer them. Use whatever method works for you. You might tap, you might journal, you might meditate, you might use the Akashic Records. The important thing here is to take the time with these questions and go through them and really explore the answers. So the first thing is, how does this urge to eat show up for you? So once you've been triggered, once you've had that emotion and that feeling rise up, then how does this urge to eat show up for you? Is it that slow build throughout the day where you reach that point of like, oh my God, that's it, I just need the food? Or is it instantaneous? Is it like, I am so angry, give me the bag of chips? How does it show up? And what foods are you drawn to? Because as I've just shown with the chakras, it's a really good way of knowing not just the emotion attached, but where it's showing up within your energy. So if you're being drawn to chocolate, for instance, then you know it's somehow related to your heart chakra and that need or that sense and belief around love. So that's going to really help when it does come to healing your emotional eating. Knowing that is really, really helpful. Knowing the types of foods that you are drawn to and what chakra they're linked to really does help you to fully understand that and know where to begin your healing or what you need to work on, which is why I've included them for you. Now, this is a really important one. How does it feel for you when that urge to eat takes over? And by this, it's, do you feel that you can actually stop the urge to eat, that you don't have to eat? Or does it feel like it's completely taken over you, that you can't possibly stop? Like once the urge hits you, that's it. There's nothing that could persuade it. There's nothing you could do that could kind of step in and break the cycle. Because this will really help you to see how much of your power you're giving away with your emotional eating, but also it'll show where you are in terms of being able to heal your emotional eating as well. And this next question, it might be a little bit tough for some of you, but what else other than your emotions? Because obviously we're driven by our emotions when it comes to eating and using food as a coping mechanism. But what else is happening for you when you have that urge to eat? In particular, what thoughts and beliefs are going through your head? Because these thoughts and beliefs are really what drives you. Although we start this cycle with being emotionally triggered in some way, it's then the thoughts and the beliefs around those emotions, around those triggers, around our worth and our power that are going to fuel that urge to eat. It's going to make the difference between whether or not we do then go on to overeat or whether we're able to stop it in its tracks at that moment and switch to a different strategy or switch to something else that's going to allow us to not engage in the overeating. So that's a really I don't know. There's something about that one. I don't think we often really consider the thoughts and the beliefs that are linked to our feelings and our emotions when we're going through this. We see them as being separate sometimes, even though they are so connected. When it comes to body image, for instance, it's not just how we feel or how we think, it's also the actions we take and the way I see ourselves. And they all kind of intertwine. So although they're four separate aspects, you kind of can't have one without the other. So how you see yourself is going to be linked to how you feel about yourself, which is linked to what you think about yourself, which is linked to how you behave towards yourself. And then that all comes back around. It's like this nice little, and it's not really a circle because it kind of goes all over the place. It's just so connected. And your thoughts and your beliefs are going to be connected to your feelings and emotions, because what you're feeling is going to influence your thoughts, but then also your thoughts and beliefs are going to influence your feelings and emotions. As I'm sure you already know, it only takes one little negative thought that can really make you spiral out of control. It takes one negative idea about how you're looking that, sometimes when we're triggered, it's not by other people or other situations. It can be our own thoughts and behaviors and beliefs. So, that negative thought that, oh no, you've stuffed up again and you're such a failure, can then really make you feel so poorly about yourself that will trigger this cycle. So being able to understand that when you're feeling the urge to eat, what thoughts are coming through with that is a really powerful way of then being able to take back your power and take back some control, because you can see how the two are linked. Okay. Feel free to take a little break if you need to. Pause this if you need to. We still have a little bit to go. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I'm really enjoying speaking about this. I wasn't aware that I could speak so much on this. Apparently, I'm a little bit more passionate about this than I actually thought, which is a good thing, right? We all need something that we're passionate about that we could talk for hours on. Probably not literally for hours, but that's okay. All right, so now the third step in our cycle of emotional eating is the act of overeating itself. Now, this is probably the step that feels the most inevitable, the one that you have no control over, right? Because when you've reached this point, it can feel like it's all over. You just give up. May as well just surrender. Like, what are you gonna do? You've been triggered, you've got the urge, and now you're just stuffing your face full of whatever that you feel drawn to eat. But it doesn't actually have to be that way. And this is probably, I don't know, in my experiences, this is the part that kind of takes care of itself once we take care of everything else. Even if you're triggered, even if you have that urge to eat, when you have those other strategies and habits in place, when you have other coping mechanisms, when you are more aware of your feelings and your emotions and your thoughts and your triggers and all the rest of it, the actual act of overeating dies down. It becomes less important. It's not as inevitable as we think it is. It doesn't have to be something that you engage in once you understand the rest of it. I hope that makes sense. It kind of just takes care of itself. When I was younger, so much of what I was told was about how I needed to lose weight, how I had to do this, I had to be on a diet, I had to restrict this, I had to restrict that. That never worked. What would work when it came to whenever I was trying to lose weight was actually focusing on exercise and my health first, and then the food would always take care of itself. So if I was making a daily habit of getting up and going for a walk and taking care of myself and doing some stretching or some yoga, then over time I would naturally start to eat better. Not because I was trying to lose weight, not because I was trying to diet, but because the other actions that I had in place would then filter through to where I'd be drawn to wanting to have food that was going to nourish me rather than just binging and eating whatever else I could get my hands on. So it's kind of like that. When we take care of the triggers, when we understand the triggers, when we understand why we're feeling that urge to eat, when we understand where it's all coming from, when we can understand the food we're drawn to and how it's energetically linked to our chakras, then this step takes care of itself. Now, this is also linked to our why, and I'm going to talk about that soon once we get through the next step. But the why of your eating is also linked to the overeating, and when we understand the why, then again the overeating takes care of itself. And this is also why I said at the beginning that when it comes to emotional eating, it's not about the eating and it's not about the food. This is the part where we get to see that the eating itself is just the symptom. The eating is the symptom of being triggered and the urge to eat. It is about not being able to address our feelings and our thoughts and our emotions and our beliefs, which is why when we can do all of that, this part really becomes less of an issue. But I do have some questions for you around this one. Okay, this is only a short little section, but one of the things that is really helpful with the whole overeating, particularly in the beginning when you're trying to work through this, is understanding how it makes you feel. So when you've been triggered, when you then have that urge to eat and you finally begin to eat, how do you feel when you start the process of eating? Okay, because it's going to bring something. It's going to help you in some way. I mean, that's why we do it. We do it because it's a coping mechanism. We do it because, as I said in the beginning with Are You an Emotional Eater? Food can be really soothing and calming and makes us feel better. We do use it as a reward. We use it in celebrations when we're happy, when we're sad. There's so much attached to the act of eating. So when you have been triggered and you have all those emotions and feelings that you can't express, what is the act of eating doing for you? How is it helping you? How is it making you feel? Are you feeling soothed by it? Are you feeling comforted? These are all really important things to explore with this one, because this is how you get to know in part why you're eating and what it's actually doing, how it's actually serving you. And what are the thoughts that go through your head when you begin to eat? Because we've already spoken about how our thoughts and our beliefs are linked to our feelings and emotions. So when you've gone through the other two steps and you're now sitting there and you're eating and you've got, those foods that represent what they need to represent for you, what are the thoughts? Now, what you're thinking at the beginning is probably going to be different to at the end of whatever you've eaten. And that's because particularly when we're binging and we're overeating, as I'll get to in a moment, we end up feeling guilt and shame. So in the beginning though, we're not feeling those when we start to eat because we're hiding those emotions, we're stuffing them down. So as you're going through your cycle of eating and you're binging and you're overeating, what are the thoughts processes? What is going through your mind? What are you telling yourself? How is it, what kind of more positive things are happening at the start compared to the end? This is a really fascinating thing, I think, to actually explore how your thoughts change over the course of a binging session. And then what does the food represent to you? Because we did speak earlier about how food can feel like a friend, and food can make us feel safe, and it can make us feel content, and it can bring us that comfort. So when you are in this part of the cycle, when you are engaging in the overeating, what is the food representing for you? Is it a means of expressing your feelings? So are you eating, like potato chips, which are nice and crunchy because you're angry, and so the crunch of those chips helps to represent that anger and frustration because you're biting down and you're crushing it to pieces? Is it does the food represent the emotions that you're feeling? Is the the smooth creaminess of the ice cream somehow reflecting that sadness that you're feeling? If it's the chocolate, what is it that the chocolate represents? Does it represent love for you? We know it's linked to the heart chakra, but is it representing love for you? What is it it's showing? Is there something sensual about the chocolate that's making you feel, nice and warm and gooey inside? Is that's what it's representing? It's at the comfort of the carbs that are making you feel better. Really take some time to explore what the food represents, because that helps us not necessarily to stop overeating, but when we have a meaning for it, it really makes it easier to understand. When we It helps with us to know why, but it's also just understanding that link and how it's tied into what we're feeling. The food is a representation. It's not just a coping mechanism. It's not just a way of hiding what we're feeling. It represents something else. We've chosen that food for a reason. And even if you don't want to explore it from a chakra and energetic perspective, you have still chosen that particular food in that particular moment for a reason. Now, obviously, there are going to be times when you will binge on things simply because that's what's in the house. I've done that before, where I might not necessarily have what I want, but whatever food is there will do, because I just have that urge to eat and I've just got to eat something and I just need to squash it down, and I don't really care what it is that I'm eating. But generally speaking, we're going to be drawn to a particular food for a particular reason. So being able to know what it's representing will really help us with that. Now, the fourth step in our emotional eating cycle is the shame and the guilt. And I think the hardest part of this one is it can often be a trigger itself. Because of the emotion and the feeling attached to it, this can really be its own trigger. Now, this is the one that's really linked for me to our worth and what we believe we deserve. The reason we feel guilt after engaging in that overeating, that binge eating with our emotional eating, is because we feel like we've done something wrong. We've been a bad girl. We haven't followed the rules. We've not shown willpower. We've been powerless. We just haven't done what was supposed to be done, because although we're not supposed to show our emotions and we're not supposed to express our feelings, and we're supposed to be all night and coiled and wound up tight and nothing's supposed to break free and we're supposed to have all these walls, we're not supposed to go and eat. We're supposed to restrict what we eat, and we're supposed to be nice and thin, and we're supposed to do this and we're supposed to do that, because that's what good girls do. And if you're not the good girl and you're not maintaining your body and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, then you've obviously done something wrong and you're just not acceptable, and that's just how it is, right? I have no doubt you all know exactly where I'm coming from with that little rant, because that is what we get taught. And so when we then go and we've had this binge, for me, a lot of my binges would come after trying to diet. So I might have 2 or 3 weeks on a diet where I've severely restricted my food, where I've been eating nothing but low-fat food, where my body was often craving fat. One of the biggest things that would always happen to me when I was dieting was after a few weeks, I would crave KFC, because my body would be so depleted of fat, so depleted of essential fatty acids, that I would start to crave the fattiest thing that I obviously knew that my body could, send the signal to. And I would eventually give in and eat a shitload of it and then feel like crap. But that's a whole different story. But I would start to crave what my body needed, right? And when we are in this part of the cycle with the guilt, that's where the guilt comes from. We have this story that we're supposed to stick with the diet, and we're supposed to do this and we're supposed to do that. So the guilt comes because we haven't had that willpower to stick to the diet. We haven't had that sense of control because, you can't lose control and go and binge and eat 10 meals worth in one sitting. That's just not acceptable. That's not what good little girls do. That's not what the skinny girls do. That's not what the ones who are good enough to be loved to do. Well, no wonder that this and this and this and this is happening in your life, because you can't even stick to a diet, right? So there's that sense of guilt and shame that, oh, I did the wrong thing and I gave away my power, and I'm so unworthy and I'm so undeserving because I can't even do this. And it does come down to that sense of worth, and it comes down to power and control. Because when we know our worth, when we feel worthy, when we know that we are deserving, when we've gone and we've worked through those stories that we're carrying around what we're worthy of, what we deserve, what we're allowed to have, when we know that we're absolutely deserving of the most wonderful, abundant life, and that none of that has anything to do with how much income we earn, with how we look, where we live, with who our family is, when we understand that our worth has absolutely nothing to do with that and has everything to do with our own ability to see our truth and to love ourselves, then we get to drop the guilt and the shame. We also, when we know our worth, tend to not be fully engaged in emotional eating on a regular basis because we're not stuffing down our feelings. But knowing our worth gives us back our power. It allows us to be in control. Now, obviously, there can be issues in regards to control because you don't always... It's not always about having full control. One of the reasons that a lot of teenagers end up developing eating disorders is because their food intake and how much they exercise is the one thing that they can control when their life is in turmoil. They can determine and control whether or not they eat. They can control whether or not they exercise and how much they exercise. It gives them a sense of power. But when we know our worth, it's kind of a different type of power. We know we don't have to control everything. We know it's okay to explore our emotions. We know it's okay to express what we're feeling. And so that then takes away that guilt and shame that we've done something wrong. Because if we do happen to engage in emotional eating because we've had a rough day and we just, I'm feeling really angry, and yes, I could sit down and I could journal about that, but right now, I just, I'd like to sit down with this big bowl of pasta and not really think about it. Yeah, sometimes we're going to have days like that, but there's a difference in that being something that gets out of control because we're not facing what we're feeling and being able to acknowledge that, yes, I'm feeling really shitty and I know that dose of carbs is going to bring some endorphins. That's just going to make me feel better. I'm aware of that. And one of the really good things about that is when we're aware of that, and when we're aware that we're feeling a particular thing and that we still want to eat, what happens is that we then actually don't overeat because we don't need to overeat. You could sit with that bowl, a nice normal sized bowl of pasta, and feel the comfort from it without having to then binge on it and then have that cycle of the guilt and shame coming with it as well. Now, what makes the guilt and shame, of course, so powerful is the fact that it takes away our power and makes us feel powerless to stop. But when we turn the tables, when we're feeling that worth and we take back our power, we know that we can stop at any time. We know that we are not restricted by the food. We know we're not being controlled by the food. We are the ones who can then have that awareness over our own feelings and emotions and our own thoughts and beliefs. So it gives us back our power and gives us back our ability to change. Okay, so questions. Um, Now with these, it's as I said, the guilt and the shame can often be its own trigger. So be aware of that as you're answering these because it might bring up certain feelings and emotions for you. And the first thing I want you to ask yourself is what you are most ashamed of when you do actually overeat. Because this is going to be shame is such a powerful emotion in itself. I've had things, part of my healing came, a big part of my healing came when I realized that I had been carrying a story from my early 20s in which I was made to feel a great deal of shame. I had this situation take place. My parents had then decided that it wasn't my story, it wasn't my situation. It became about them, and I was told that I was supposed to feel this great amount of shame and guilt over what had happened. And for a really long time, I did because I kept getting fed this story around it. And then one day I realized that, you know, although I did feel a little bit of guilt and I wasn't pleased with what had happened, I didn't actually have to carry any shame. Like, it had happened and there had been consequences and everything had been dealt with and it was, over and done with basically. But I was carrying shame because I was told I was supposed to feel shame. This thing that had been my situation had been something that should have been my story. It should have been something that I got to speak about, that I got to tell, was taken away from me and instead replaced by this high level of shame. So, shame is a really powerful emotion because once I realized that I didn't have to feel any shame and that I could take back that story, that I could actually make that story my story, that it didn't have to be everybody else's, that really changed a lot of things in my life. And although that situation was in no way connected to my emotional eating and how I healed that, at the same time it was, because being able to release shame in that area and know that I could take back my own story, write it in my own way, allowed me to take back my power. And that meant that I could then take back power in other areas as well. So, to know why you feel ashamed when you engage in overeating and emotional eating is a way of taking back your power. And where does this sense of shame come from? Okay, because we don't just feel shame for the sake of shame, right? Shame comes because we're told that something we're doing is wrong, that we're somehow wrong, that we're like it's just wrong. Like, there's nothing, I don't know how else to describe it. We get told it's just wrong. We begin to think that there is something wrong with us because we've done this bad thing, because we haven't been the good girl. That's not always the case. So what are you most ashamed of? Is it that you didn't have the willpower? Is it that you feel like you failed? Is it because good girls don't do this? Where's the story of shame coming from? And I also want you to think or write down what negative thoughts come through for you when you are feeling this guilt and shame, because there will be negativity attached to it because of the nature of the guilt and the shame. So what negative thoughts come through for you? And I guess really importantly, because this is linked to self-abuse, what really hurtful things do you say to yourself and do you call yourself when you are feeling the guilt and shame from overeating? Because it's kind of like how people always say, take notice when someone's angry at you and what they say, because that's when the truth comes out. Or when someone's really, really drunk and they're speaking their mind, that's when the truth comes out. When you are feeling guilt and shame, those negative, hurtful things that you say to yourself are going to show you what you actually deep down think about yourself. And that's the part of you that you need to heal. That those words, the name calling, the awful, awful things that you say about yourself, that's the part that needs to heal. For me, mine was always that I was a fat, ugly, stupid, useless dog who was a waste of space and didn't deserve to live, and that everyone else would just be so much happier if I wasn't around. Now, obviously, I know that that's not true. But for a very long time, through my teens and my 20s and even into my 30s, that was what I would say to myself. Every time I felt guilt or shame, every time I was trying to punish myself, every time I really wanted to hurt myself, that's what that little voice in my head would say. That was what I had to heal. That was the part that I really had to take notice of. So what are the things that are coming through for you when you are feeling this guilt and shame, when you are feeling that you have failed yet again and that you're just, this awful, useless person that, if you could just stick to a diet? Those nasty things, that's the part when it comes to not even just healing emotional eating, but healing in general and being able to remember your worth. That's the part that you need to get to. That's the part that you need to work on. That's the part that you need to heal the most. So what do we eat? Okay, I did say before that I was going to get to the why. And you might have already guessed it. We eat and we turn to food firstly to cope. It's a coping mechanism. It is a symptom of something greater. I said that earlier. We want to be able to numb what we're feeling. We don't, it's really hard sometimes to face our truth, to face what we're feeling. We can't always articulate what we're feeling. We can't always express it. And not just because it doesn't feel safe. For some of us, it really doesn't feel safe to express what we're feeling. We don't feel safe or in an environment where we can actually speak up. And so when that happens, when we don't feel that it's safe, then of course we're going to look for other ways to cope. We're going to look for other ways to squash down our emotions, to not express it, to not speak our truth. But also, we often just don't feel worthy and deserving of what it is we're trying to achieve. We don't feel that we have the right to really exist, to be heard, to be seen, to be successful. We don't feel that we're worthy because we don't look a certain way, or we don't act a certain way, or we don't live in the right area, or we don't have this qualification. Really, it can be absolutely anything. But at the end of the day, the reason we turn to food to cope is just because it's easier. We don't have to go through having to explore our feelings. We don't have to realize that we are afraid to speak our truth. We don't have to realize that, this particular situation or this particular person really isn't healthy for me, and that I need to get out of that relationship, or I need to leave that job, or that's not the purpose that I'm here to live, or that's not the course that I want to study. So it's easier to just ignore that. It's easier to not have to face that. It's easier to not have to make those changes where we realize that, we're doing things and tolerating things that we really shouldn't, because we feel that we don't deserve anything better, or we feel that we're not worthy of anything better. Now, as I mentioned earlier, of course, emotional eating is linked to our throat chakra and that whole pushing down our truth. Now, speaking of our truth, it doesn't always have to be shared, and not everything has to be healed. Sometimes the act of being able to acknowledge that you are not happy, that you have been believing stories created by other people rather than making your own stories, writing your own stories, that can be enough to create the change that you need. If you are engaging regularly in emotional eating because you're constantly frustrated, and that you're frustrated because you don't feel like you're allowed to use your voice, then being able to acknowledge that can be huge. Being able to acknowledge that, I hate it. I hate going around to my parents because every time I do, there's going to be a comment on my weight, there's going to be a comment on the kids, there's going to be a comment on my job. They're going to make me feel like I'm somehow failed, even though I know I haven't. I'm going to feel like a child again, like they just don't see me as an adult. Being able to acknowledge that is incredibly powerful. Being able to acknowledge that when I get to the weekend, I just want to go and sit with friends and drink the whole bottle of wine because it's been so stressful and I'm stuck in a job that I don't like. But right now, I need the money and I can't make that change because whatever the reason is. Being able to acknowledge that is incredibly powerful. So, the why of why you are eating and engaging in emotional eating is really about being able to find your power again by being able to acknowledge what it is that you can't say, by being able to acknowledge what it is you're actually feeling. You don't have to say it out loud. You don't even have to act on it. I think we are currently in a society where it's like, oh, I realize that this really frustrates me and angers me, and that's why I eat. Oh, well, now you have to go fix it, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to go explore it, and then you have to go and you forgive, and you have to go and you do this, and you have to go and do that. No, sometimes you just have to go, you know what? I'm not happy in that situation right now. Can't do anything about it. Don't have the money to change it. You know, this situation is just not, blah, 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 is not lining up. Can't fix it at the moment, but hey, I'm not happy with it. That can bring so much power back to you. Being able to acknowledge what it is that makes you unhappy, or being able to acknowledge what it is that you're afraid of, or where it is that you don't feel worthy, is incredibly powerful. So I really would encourage you to actually look at your why. If you do nothing else from this masterclass, if you take nothing else away from this, take away acknowledging your why. Even if you continue in the cycle of emotional eating, even if you are not yet ready to have to change that because of the comfort it brings you, at least know why you are using food to cope. Why are you choosing to eat? Okay? Because it is a choice at the end of the day. It doesn't always feel that way. But when you can acknowledge the why and know why you're choosing to eat, it's going to make a huge amount of difference. And really look at the emotions and feelings and thoughts and beliefs that are playing out behind that. Look at where this is going, how it's influencing you, what's going on behind the scenes. Because we can't always express what we're feeling, we can't always admit the truth to ourselves, but we can at least acknowledge that we have these feelings and thoughts and beliefs going on that are having a big impact on us. And that's probably the most important thing you can do. It's what I really want you to take away from this the most, is that what is it that you can acknowledge right now about why you're eating? Really, that's going to give you the power. Like I said, if you take nothing else from this, I want you to take that. Why is it you're doing it? Why are you turning to food? Don't have to heal it if you don't want to, but just acknowledge it. Just take it on board and go, yep, I overeat when I'm frustrated because, and I get frustrated because, and that's okay. Tap about it. Do some tapping. It's okay that I get frustrated and I overeat when blah, blah, blah happens. I'm still worthy. I'm still good enough. It's fine. That is something that I would really love for you to take away from this at its core. Okay, so the final thing that I want to share in regards to the cycle of emotional eating is how to create, not even how to create, but the strategies and habits that will help you in working through your own cycle of emotional eating and working through your why, working through learning new ways to cope when you are triggered and you have that urge to overeat. Oh, sorry, I realised I just went off camera. Now, the key here is to create new strategies, new habits, new skills that are going to help you but that aren't linked with food. Now, I mentioned earlier that often when it comes to emotional eating, one of the things that particularly nutritionalists will often guide people with is food replacement. So, it'll be things like, if you're drawn to eating potato chips, replace it with celery and carrots. Or if you're drawn to ice cream, try low-fat yogurt. Or, I'm not sure what the replacement for chocolate is. I've forgotten what that is. But you get my point. It's normally, if you feel the need to eat this, replace it with this because it's healthier. Now, that's not necessarily, from a nutrition standpoint, it's not a bad thing. Replace the unhealthy with the healthy. The problem with it, though, is that it doesn't teach you new skills. It doesn't teach you new coping mechanism. When I was about 14 or 15, I had a binge that was apples and cheese slices, Kraft cheese slices. And the reason for that is my parents had gone away. I'd gone somewhere overnight. I was by myself. And there really wasn't anything else in the house. I'd had a bad day, really emotional. I just wanted to eat. And there really wasn't anything else. And I didn't have money and I couldn't get to the shop. And I mean, even if I had money, I couldn't get to the shop. So I was really limited in what I was able to binge on. So I binged on apples and cheese. It's probably the healthiest binge in the history of binges. But I just had to eat. Now, obviously, that's a pretty healthy binge, right? And you're certainly not going to have the same calorie quantity as you would by binging on chips and chocolate and lollies and everything else. But it was still a binge, right? So it really didn't help me express my emotions. It didn't help in my cycle of emotional eating. And that's kind of my point. It's, yes, absolutely take on board the advice of nutritionalists and dietitians. Switch out the unhealthy foods if you can. However, just switching them, if you're going to binge and all you've got in the house is celery and carrot sticks and you don't have any chips and you want something crunchy, you're still going to binge, right? So it doesn't change the behavior. It doesn't change the trigger. It doesn't change the urge. It doesn't change why you're eating. It just replaces it with something a little bit healthier. So when you're creating new strategies and habits, you want them to be things that are not linked to food, that are things that will bring you back to the present, that are things that are going to release that emotion, that are going to actually help you physically, mentally, and emotionally. So I actually have a few that I would like to suggest for you that can help you like on the path to creating these new strategies and habits. Now the first one is mindfulness. And as we know, mindfulness allows us to be present in the moment. It brings us that level of awareness that we might not already have. And being aware is obviously the key to bringing back our power and being able to heal and know where we are on the cycle. So if we're mindful of the fact that we've been triggered and we're mindful of the fact that we're feeling whatever we're feeling, even if you were to still engage in the act of eating to deal with your emotions, you are then mindful of it. You are mindful of what you're doing. And as I mentioned before, that awareness and that acknowledgement means that you don't tend to overeat. Like I mentioned with the pasta scenario, if you really just need the comfort of the pasta because you've had a bad day and you're aware you've had a bad day and you're feeling a bit emotional, it's really just like, actually in my case, it's a big bowl of risotto. Same thing, right? But being able to be aware of that and acknowledge what you're feeling means I'm not going to overeat with that. Or if it's not that food itself, when we're not aware, when we're not mindful, not only would we have the big bowl of pasta or rice, but we'd follow it up with potato chips and chocolate and lollies and biscuits and ice cream and whatever else. But when we're aware of it, well, then it's just the bowl of risotto or pasta, and then we're good. Now, this is really interesting. Studies have actually shown that in terms of emotional eating, mindfulness can actually reduce the occurrence of emotional eating. It doesn't stop it fully, because obviously there's more involved there. As we've discussed, you need to look at your why, you need to look at those feelings and beliefs and those thoughts and your stories, and really go deep, because the emotional eating is just a symptom. But on the surface, right, because most things are only dealing with the surface, they're only dealing with the symptom. When you are engaged in regular mindfulness practices, when you are taking that time to be mindful and aware, it does reduce the incidence of emotional eating. And two of the effective forms of mindfulness practice that they found was actually both the body scan meditation and the muscle relaxation meditation. And these are two meditations where, with the body scan, basically you are going through, you start at your feet and then you go up through each part of your body and really feel into it, feel what's going on, basically channel what your body's telling you, right? You go through and you just take that time to really check in with each aspect of your body from feet to head. And with the muscle relaxation meditation, very, very similar, but you're consciously focusing on relaxing each area of your body as you go through, rather than tuning in to feel what each part's feeling, if there's any tension, if it's too tight, if it's too loose, that type of thing. With the muscle relaxation, when you're actually going in and consciously relaxing, it's a bit of a tongue twister, each part of the body. And they've been shown in some studies to be really effective for helping to reduce how often you do eat emotionally. The next single most important thing, I feel, when it comes to creating a new strategy around your emotional eating, is self-care. You have to make yourself a priority. And I know that is really difficult in this day and age, and we have so much weighing on us, and we've got family responsibilities and we've got work or business responsibilities. It can feel impossible to actually take time for ourselves, but it is imperative that you make time for yourself, that you have a self-care practice. Now, yes, self-care can be about, if you're able to, wherever you're living, go to the salon or go to the day spa or get a massage or get your nails done, get your hair done, get blah, 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 all that external stuff. Yes, that is self-care. But really, self-care is more on a daily basis. It's about putting yourself first. It's about having a daily practice. I know a lot of people talk about daily practices, and some people don't really understand. It's about having, even if it's just 5 minutes in the morning, to just sit and tune into yourself. Now, ideally, a good daily practice is something that allows you to journal or to meditate or to get in some exercise, things like that. But even if it's just being able to sit at the kitchen table with your cup of tea or your cup of coffee and just tune into yourself, that is self-care. Being able to take a nap if you need it is self-care. Being able to get to a day where things aren't going well and just going, you know what, I'm taking a break, is self-care. For those of you who still menstruate, you might find that if your first couple of days of your period, you just don't have the energy. One of the best things you can do, and something that has really helped me in my business, is to give yourself a break on those days, to just relax, to do as little as possible, to not schedule appointments, to, even if it's just vegging on the couch and watching Netflix or reading a book or staying in bed. Self-care is what will make all the difference, because if you're not looking after yourself, and I know it's an old adage, but you honestly cannot look after anyone else. And when you're not looking after yourself, when your emotions are running high, then you have no power over your emotional eating. It is going to control you because there's only so much you can do. You cannot continue to run on empty. So make yourself a priority. Be mindful and make yourself a priority and have some self-care, even if it's just 5 minutes. Do something for you every single day. Now, one of the other strategies is to release the energy. Now, there's always an energy attached to our feelings and emotions. So, for instance, if you're feeling angry and frustrated, rather than eat the crunchy food, because that is actually why you are drawn to the crunchy food, by the way. If you're angry and frustrated, it's the crunch. It's my favorite food. It's the crunch because it allows you to really bite down and you've got that sound in your ears as well. It's the texture of the food, right? Being able to release the energy in a more positive way is what you're aiming for here. Now, toddlers are onto something. Can I just say, I think it is really unfair that as adults it is unacceptable for us to throw tantrums and stand and stamp our feet and throw ourselves on the ground kicking and screaming. Toddlers have got that down pat. But take some advice from a toddler. If you can't scream into the pillow, punch the pillow. If your kids have some soft toys, chuck them at the wall. If nobody's watching, stamp your feet and scream. Release the energy. If you're feeling sad, watch some really soppy clips on YouTube and bawl your eyes out. Listen to some sad music. Do something in line with what you're feeling that will allow you to release it. Again, it's not always about being able to articulate it because sometimes we can't. Sometimes you might be just feeling really sad and you don't know why, right? Sometimes you might feel frustrated and angry and you don't know why. These are the times when normally you would turn to food, but if you watch the sad movie or the sad clip so that you're bawling your eyes out, if you start throwing things or screaming, that's going to release the energy, and you don't have to know why you're feeling that way, but at least you're getting it out of your system. Another really beneficial habit to develop is some exercise, because exercise is great for our mental health as well as our emotional health and our physical health. It's not always, one of the big issues I think sometimes with exercise is we get told we have to do it because it's going to give us the body we want, particularly as women. You have to go to the gym, you have to do this, you have to do that because that's what's going to give you the body. I don't know how many women would come into the gym when I was a personal trainer that would sit in front of me. They would be overweight women. They would sit in front of me. They would tell me how committed they were, that they were going to come this many times a week, that this was the kind of program they wanted, that they were seeing someone about their eating to get their nutrition under control, and they were so committed and they were going to do this. And I would just look at them. Back then I wasn't as in tune with my intuition, but even then I would look at them and it's like, no, you're not, because you don't want to be here. You're coming to the gym because either somebody bought you a membership thinking they were helping you, or because you think that that's what you have to do. You don't want to be in the gym. Not everybody likes the gym. I get that. I like the gym, but I know not everyone likes the gym. I also like to walk and do yoga. Not everybody likes that. Some people like to swim. Some people like to run. I hate running, but some people love to run. Some people like to play golf. Some people like to play sport. The exercise itself doesn't matter. What does matter is that if A, you need to exercise, but B, that you do an exercise that you like. Because those women that would come in and tell me they were completely committed and that this is what they were going to do, I know damn well they were going to walk out of there. Even if they did come in for a session, any session in the gym they had, they were going to go straight out and reward themselves with food to negate anything that they might have done in there, because they didn't want to be there. And for most of them, they didn't even want to lose weight. They just felt pressured to have to do it, and so that was the action that we're taking. Now, regular exercise helps us to manage our emotions. It raises our endorphin levels. It gives us our serotonin and our dopamine. We feel good. There is a reason there's a runner's high. And it doesn't just apply to running. Any exercise, it makes you feel good. It helps with our sleep patterns. It helps us to not feel so depressed. As I mentioned earlier, regular exercise also helps take care of your nutrition because you naturally start to gravitate towards foods that are going to nourish you. You don't feel the need to have to binge and eat unhealthy food when you are exercising regularly. But the key, of course, is to find a form of exercise that you enjoy. If you don't like the gym, don't go. Don't buy don't buy the gym membership. If you don't like yoga, don't do it just because it's fashionable. Don't do it. I don't know why people push themselves. I love yoga, but I don't know why people push themselves into yoga if they don't like it. If you don't like walking, then don't do it. If you find walking, running, things like that painful, buy an exercise bike or swim so that you don't have the impact on your joints. Do Pilates. If you don't want to go out, then there are plenty of things on. There's plenty of stuff on YouTube that you can do if you don't want to leave the house. You can buy a treadmill or an exercise bike or a cross trainer. Just find something you like. Crank up the stereo and dance around the house while nobody else is home for like half an hour. That's fun. That'll release emotion as well. That'll help you with those feelings and emotions and frustrations. Like there's nothing quite like belting out a few tunes to make you feel good, right? It's about finding the exercise that you actually like and you'd want to stick to. That's the key there. But regular exercise really has such a powerful impact on our mental and emotional health. That's the part of exercise that really should be promoted. And this ties in to doing something every day that makes you feel happy. Now this is self-care as well, to a degree, because we tend to be so overrun with everything we've got to do for everyone else or things we've got to do in our business. We have our big long to-do lists. When you make your to-do list each day, add something that's just for you. Even if it's reading 5 pages of a book or watching a TV. One trick I learnt this years ago when I was a freelance writer. I used to spend all my time during the day writing, and I tended to find that I would actually sit at my desk and keep writing while I was having lunch, and I started to force myself to take a break by putting back then, because I'm showing my age a little bit, I used to have box DVDs of my favourite TV shows, so I'd put in the DVD and I would watch an episode and that would be my lunch break. These days, there's Netflix. I still do it. I will take a break at lunchtime and I will watch a full episode of whatever show I'm watching at the time. Because it makes me sit there and take a break. It makes me step away from work and step away from anything else. I just sit and I enjoy my lunch and I'll watch something. And then when lunch is over, rather than turning the episode off, I will continue to watch to the end of that episode so that I have taken a break. So that's just one thing. For you, it could be something else. I also make sure that I'm reading at least a couple of pages of a book every night. Generally, it's more, but even if I can just get 2 or 3 pages in, because that's something I enjoy. It's about finding little things each day that will help you with your emotions too. And then the final strategy, and it's probably one of the most important ones, is to make sure you're getting enough sleep. We need sleep to regenerate our body, our mind, and our soul. We have to have enough sleep. We've all heard of the different studies that show the effects of sleep deprivation and how dangerous it is. We know that we don't function well. We all have our own optimal hours that we need each night. I know for me, it's probably about 9 hours a night for me to be really on my game, but I can get away with 6 or 7 without feeling the effects. You will be the same. We have our optimal number that we ideally would like to get, but then we also have a number where we're still good and functioning really, really well on that. So I know if I can get at least 6 or 7 hours a night, I'm still going to be functioning really well and at my best. Anything less than that, particularly if it's for more than one night, then I'm not going to be functioning well, and I'm going to be moody, and I'm going to be easily frustrated and angered and very, very emotional. So getting enough sleep is huge. And take a nap during the day if you can. I used to think napping during the day was really, really stupid. But the last year or so, I have found that particularly if I'm struggling at night with sleep, now that I'm getting a little bit older, sometimes I have bouts of insomnia. A couple of hours for napping in the afternoon really does help. If you are not getting enough sleep at night, schedule in a nap time. It will make all the difference. Trust me on that. I know it seems a little bit silly. It's like, I'm not going to take a nap. Take a nap. Or even just relax on the couch and zone out for a little bit. You know how we used to have those ads here in Australia for the power nap when you were driving? You know, take a 15-minute power nap if you've been travelling for X amount of time. Take a little power break throughout the day too was really helpful. If you just lay on the couch and have a little relax and, you know, step away from the devices and just sit there and not do anything and zone out, that's really powerful too. So what I would like to ask you now is have a think about the strategies and habits that you have in place that would actually support you healing from your emotional eating. Like, what are you currently doing that would actually help you in those moments when you're drawn to overeating? And if you don't have any strategies in place, if that's your only coping mechanism, then what could you start to incorporate from the list I've just given you that would actually help you to manage your emotions? And have a think of how it would feel to no longer be controlled by food. That's a huge one, I know. But imagine what it would be like if you were no longer controlled by your food and emotions. How would that make you feel? This is a really powerful question to ask yourself. How would it actually feel? Other than absolutely amazing, which it is, by the way. But you know, how would it make you personally feel to not have that hanging over your head anymore, to not have to feel guilty or shameful that you've binged when you shouldn't have, that you're reaching for food when you're feeling it, like just without knowing why? How amazing would that feel for you to not be controlled anymore? And this next question might be a little bit triggering, but bear with me. I want you to ask yourself if you are actually ready to heal your emotional eating. Because if you are not, then it's not going to matter what you take from this video, from this masterclass. It's not going to matter what habits and strategies you put in place. If you do not want to heal, then you won't. You will find a way to sabotage it. It's like those women I just talked about at the gym who didn't want to be there, who didn't really want to lose weight. They were going to sabotage, subconsciously probably. Most of it's not conscious, but they were going to sabotage. Right? It's often why a lot of us struggle when it comes to weight loss, even if we're doing all the right things, because deep down we don't actually want to. We feel pressured, we don't feel ready, whatever else is going on in regards to our thoughts and our beliefs. If you are not ready to heal, if you are not ready to make that change, then none of this is going to matter. So you need to be really honest with yourself in that one. I know you've gone through nearly 2 hours in this masterclass to get for me to say if you don't want to, then it's a waste of time. It's not really a waste of time. All this information is really going to help you, but you need to be honest with yourself. If you are not ready to heal, then you need to acknowledge that, because that will actually also help you when you are in that cycle of emotional eating. If you know that you're not ready to heal yet and you can acknowledge that, then at least then when you're triggered and you're fighting that urge, you'll know why you're doing it, right? It still comes back to the why. If you're not ready, that's okay. Do not punish yourself because you're not ready. It's okay to not be ready. It takes time. It took me over 25 years to be fully ready to be able to heal my emotional eating and to get to a point where I could even contemplate trying to heal that, where I realized that it was a symptom and that I needed to look at everything else other than just the act of eating. Okay, so don't beat yourself up if you're not ready yet. That's okay. Just acknowledge it, because that's going to be really powerful. That's going to help you in so many ways. Okay, so Now that you understand the cycle of emotional eating, and we've looked at what it is and whether or not you're an emotional eater and all the steps in the cycle and some strategies for you, I'd actually like to take you now into a bit of a meditation to really connect in with yourself, connecting with your chakras, to get a better idea of how your emotional eating is playing out and what's influencing it. So if it's safe for you to do so, and if you have time, if you don't have time at the moment, then you can pause this masterclass here and come back to it later. But if you're able to, I invite you to sit in a comfortable position, make any necessary adjustments that you need to so that you can be comfortable throughout this. And I invite you just to close down your eyes or soften your gaze if it's not safe for you at the moment to do that. And just take one hand here on your heart chakra, the other down here on your belly. Close your eyes and just take a few deep breaths in. So breathe in through your nose, filling up your belly, letting it expand, feeling your ribs expand out. Big deep breath in and then out through your mouth, allowing your tummy to come all the way in. Feel it pulling back towards your spine, really wringing out your ribs, releasing all that air. Breathe in deeply again, same thing. Really expanding your belly and your ribs, opening everything up. Allowing any tension to be released. And breathe out. Squeezing everything out. Tummy back in towards your spine. Bringing out your ribs. Breathe back in. Fully expanding. Relaxing your mind. Breathing out through your mouth, pulling your tummy back in towards your spine, wringing out the ribs, letting go. Okay, I want you to continue to keep your eyes closed if it's safe to do so. And I want you to place your focus down upon your root chakra, down in your pelvis, down into that area of your reproductive system, right down to the root of where you are at the base of your spine. If it helps you, you can see this and really focus into this area by visualizing the color red. I just want you to sit here in this place for a moment. And I want you to ask yourself, what do you feel that you deserve in life? Let this answer come to you. Maybe a thought, a feeling, a word, a sound, a vision. However it comes through is perfect. What do you feel you deserve in life? And where do you feel you are not worthy of having what you want? Where do you feel you are not worthy of having what you want? We're going to move up now to the sacral chakra. You can visualize the color orange, and this is around your sacral spine, just at the top of your hips. And feel into this space. Feel its energy. You may already be receiving a message from it. And I want you to ask yourself, what do you feel about yourself deep within your soul? do you feel this way? If for some of you, as I ask you these questions, you might actually be feeling your sacral area contract, your lower abdominals contracting. It's particularly true for women. You might be feeling that your whole womb space is really contracting. That's okay. Acknowledge it. There's a message in there. So much of our worth is connected to our role as women and how we see and value ourselves. So if you feel that this space is really contracting, pay attention to that. Mine's actually contracting as I ask you these questions, and I'm not doing the meditation. Okay, now take your focus up to your solar plexus, right into the area of your stomach, sort of midway between your sacral and your heart. You can see the colour yellow if it helps. This is the space where, when we're speaking of clairsentience, we're going to get those gut feelings. So focus in on this and ask yourself, how does food allow you to feel nurtured? Now we're going to move up to your heart chakra and up into the center of your chest. I'm going to visualize the color green, or if you prefer, you can visualize pink. Heart chakra can be both colors. It often changes from pink to green as we grow and mature. This is where we really feel love, where we either close off or open up to love. So as you focus in on your heart chakra, ask yourself, do you feel worthy of love? Do you feel worthy of love? You may start to experience some emotion as you ask yourself this. You begin to cry, that is okay. It is perfect. Let it flow. And ask yourself where in your life you're seeking validation for this love. Where are you searching for validation that you are worthy of love? For some of you, I have no doubt right now, you are feeling the urge to pause this and go and eat. This is a big trigger. Your worth around love. That's okay. It's okay if you feel like you need to eat right now. It's okay if this is triggering you. This is a safe space. It's okay. We're going to move up now to your throat. You can see this as the colour blue if it helps. You might actually be feeling your throat start to constrict right now at the anticipation of what I'm about to ask you. Focus in on your throat, and I want you to ask yourself, what truth are you trying to squash down with food? Force yourself to swallow if you need to right now. Get those muscles moving. These are tough, I know. But these are questions that are really going to help you. Ask yourself now, what is it that you're afraid to say? What is it that you don't think that you can speak? What can't you put a voice to? You can phrase it however you like. But what is it that you are afraid to say? I want you to move up now to your third eye, in that space between your brows. Imagine the colour indigo. And I want you to ask, how do you see yourself? It can be however you like. It might be, how do you see your body? How do you see yourself as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister? How do you see yourself as a leader? That's not the important part. What's important is, how do you see yourself right now? And is this image that you're holding of yourself who you really are inside? Remember, you are safe in this meditation. You are safe in this space to explore these thoughts, these questions, to explore what's going on for you energetically and within your soul. Is the image you're holding of yourself who you really are? And as you move up to your crown now, and the colour purple, where did you lose your identity? At what moment in time did you stop being you? Did you lose who you were? There's a lot of emotion attached to this one, I know. Allow yourself to feel it, it's okay. How can you come back to being who you are at your core? How can you come back to being you? You already know the answer to this. Sitting right there in your soul. Who you are at your core, it's right there. Some of you will be thinking that you don't know how to get back to who you are, but you do. If there's a block, you can explore why. But you know how to get back to being you. Let that answer come through, it's right there. Place one hand back on your heart chakra and one back on your solar plexus. Take a few deep breaths in here, breathing in slowly through your nose. Back out through your mouth. Release any emotion that's come up for you. Another deep breath in and out. And one more. In through your nose and out through your mouth. Continue to sit for a moment with your eyes closed. Take note of any feelings, any sensations, any thoughts that are going through your mind right now. Any tightness in your body. Anywhere where you're feeling a little bit loose or stuck. to feel a beautiful pink light coming towards your heart space. Nice ball of pink light, of pink love coming into you right now, into your heart space, moving up through your throat, your third eye and your crown, down through your solar plexus, your sacral and your root, spreading through your whole physical and energetic body. This beautiful pink light of love, because you are love, you are loved, and you are worthy, and you are beautiful. When you are ready, I invite you to open your eyes and return to the physical world. I would like to thank you for being part of this masterclass. I hope that it has been informative, that it has provided you with what you need right now to be able to understand emotional eating, understand your emotional eating, to understand your triggers and that urge to eat, and to help you clear away the guilt and shame that we also often feel when it comes to emotional eating. It has been an honor and a privilege to be able to share this knowledge with you, and I would love for your feedback. I would love to hear your biggest takeaways from this masterclass and what really spoke to you the most. And remember that if at any point you can come back to this final section and repeat this meditation to really connect back in and ask those questions again. So thank you for being part of this. I am Emma Jane from Emma Jane Empowerment, and it has been an honor to serve you here today. Blessed be.